Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the History Hangout, where together we read something from London's history and discuss what it means together. Can you all hear me okay? Can everybody hear me fine? Hello to everyone who's joining us. Hello to It Was a Good Idea at the Time. Hello to Lothar Shapers. Hello to Chimozo Fu. Hello to F.A. Rees. Hello, everybody. Good. It sounds like you can hear me okay. I'm going to switch over to this side so that my head isn't in the way of the chat. There we go. And now I'm in focus. Fantastic. Oh, now that focus again. Hang on. We had this problem last week. There we go. Alrighty, let's go to the bottom. Hello to everybody who's joining us. Today we are reading. We might read a couple of pamphlets. Depends on how long they are. But we're going to be reading some works by a gentleman called Robert Wedderburn, and he was in London in the early part of the 19th century. He has an absolutely fascinating life story. I might just angle the camera down ever so slightly if I can. There, that's a little better. Yes, we're going to be reading some works by Robert Wedderburn. So he was a mixed race man. He was born to a white plantation owner father called James Wedderburn and a black enslaved mother. I think she was enslaved. Yes, I don't know a huge amount about him, except so he's not one of the black abolitionists that I've really read before. So we're going to be discovering this together. But from what I can gather, he comes to London. He doesn't seem to have been enslaved himself. He comes to London, becomes a radical preacher, and falls in with the London abolitionist crowd, including William Wilberforce, and starts writing about the horrors of slavery, in particular writing books about his own father and the frankly awful things that his dad was doing on this plantation. I believe another one, like one of the white sons of this guy, tried writing a book refuting it, but Wedderburn's story seems to have been mostly corroborated. Wedderburn's side of the story seems to have mostly been corroborated by historians. As far as I can tell, historians generally think that Robert Wedderburn was correct. Hello to everyone who's joining us. Hello especially to Matt W. Thank you very much for $3.33. It's very kind of you. Hello to people coming in from all over the world as well. It's very nice to see people from New Mexico and Wisconsin and Germany and Australia. Gosh, you must be up very early in the morning. Very late at night. Hello to Aubrey Harris from Toronto. And there's some Londoners in here as well. Hello to Kari from Finland, Sam from Tel Aviv. Oh, hello to Patricia Jarrard, who has donated $10 US. That's really kind of you. And she's put a little dancing Shiba Inu on it. So that's very sweet. Alrighty, let's get stuck in and read some of what Robert Wedderburn had to say. I do not have a physical text for this one. I'm reading from the text on archive.org. They do fantastic work. I would not be able to do my job half as well without archive.org. So I've borrowed a collection of Wedderburn's books from that website, and I'm going to flick forward. Okay. By Robert Wedderburn, dedicated to William Wilberforce, The Horrors of Slavery, exemplified in the life and history of the Reverend Robert Wedderburn, late a prisoner in His Majesty's jail at Dorchester for conscience sake, son of the late James Wedderburn, Esquire of Inveresk, slave dealer, by one of his slaves in the island of Jamaica, in which is included the correspondence of the Reverend Robert Wedderburn and his brother, A. Colville, Esquire, alias Wedderburn, of 35 Leadenhall Street. With remarks and illustrations on the treatment of the blacks and a view of their degraded state and the disgusting licentiousness of the planters. He is not taking any prisoners in this book. He is a firebrand. I should also say right out the gate, because this is a text from the 19th century, there may well be terms in it that we would not use today. When we get to those, I guess I am going to read them out. I don't particularly want to try and edit his text on the fly in my head, so I guess I'm going to read it, but just to make you guys aware that that's going to be happening. So if you don't want to hear terms that we don't use anymore for black people, this is probably a good point to turn off. Let's get going. Life of the Reverend Robert Wedderburn. The events of my life have been few and uninteresting. To my unfortunate origin I must attribute all my miseries and misfortunes. I am now upwards of 60 years of age, and therefore I cannot long expect to be numbered amongst the living. But before I pass from this vale of tears, I deem it an act of justice to myself, to my children, and to the memory of my mother, to say what I am, and who were the authors of my existence, and to show the world that not to my own misconduct is to be attributed my misfortunes, but to the inhumanity of a man, whom I am compelled to call by the name of father. I am the offspring of a slave, it is true, but I am a man of free thought and opinion, and though I was immured for 2 years in His Majesty's jail at Dorchester for daring to express my sentiments as a free man, I am still in the same in mind as I was before, and imprisonment has but confirmed me that I was right. They who know me will confirm this statement. To begin then with the beginning, I was born in the island of Jamaica about the year 1762 on the estate of a Lady Douglas, a distant relation of the Duke of Queensberry. My mother was a woman of colour by name Rosanna, and at the time of my birth a slave to the above Lady Douglas. My father's name was James Wedderburn, Esquire of Inveresk in Scotland, an extensive proprietor of sugar estates in Jamaica, which are now in the possession of a younger brother of mine by name A. Colville, Esquire, of number 35 Leadenhall Street. I must explain at the outset of this history what will appear unnatural to some, the reason of my abhorrence and indignation at the conduct of my father. From him I have received no benefit in the world. By him my mother was made the object of his brutal lust, then insulted, abused and abandoned, and within a few weeks from the present time, a younger and more fortunate brother of mine, the aforesaid A. Colville, Esquire, has had the insolence to revile her memory in the most abusive language and to stigmatise her for that which was owing to the deep and dark iniquity of my father. Can I contain myself at this, or have I not the feelings of human nature within my breast? Oppression I can bear with patience, because it hath always been my lot. But when to this is added insult and reproach from the authors of my miseries, I am forced to take up arms in my own defence and to abide the issue of the conflict. My father's name, as I said before, was James Wedderburn of Inveresk in Scotland, near Musselburgh, where, if my information is correct, the Wedderburn family have been seated for a long time. My grandfather was a staunch Jacobite and exerted himself strenuously in the cause of the Pretender. Okay, we're going to skip the Jacobite rebellion. That is not what we're here for today. Hang on. So he's saying his family were part of the Jacobite rebellion, and so they lost all their land. And my dear father found himself destitute in the world, or with no resource but his own industry. He adopted the medical profession, and in Jamaica he was doctor and man midwife, and turned an honest penny by drugging and physicking the poor blacks, where those that were cured he had the credit for those he killed, the fault was laid to their own obstinacy. So I guess a little bit of context for that. When he says he's physicking, he means he's a physician, nothing to do with physics. Yeah, he's, I guess, a doctor on slave plantations, treating the enslaved people there. In the course of time, by dint of booing and booing, my father was restored to his father's property. I'm not sure what he means by booing and booing. I mean, maybe he means like crying about it, like boo-hooing, going on about it all the time. Yeah, not hugely sure there. My father was restored to his father's property, and he became the proprietor of one of the most extensive sugar estates in Jamaica. While my dear father was poor, he was as chaste as any Scotchman, whose poverty made him virtuous. But the moment he became rich, he gave loose to his carnal appetites and indulged himself without moderation, but as parsimonious as ever. My father's mental powers were none of the brightest. Oh my God. Yeah, he's not taking any prisoners. Not only is this guy like a horrible person, but he's also dumb as well. My father's mental powers were none of the brightest, which may account for his libidinous excess. It is a common practice, as has been stated by Mr. Wilberforce in Parliament, for the planters to have lewd intercourse with their female slaves. And so inhuman are many of these said planters, that many well authenticated instances are known of their selling their slaves while pregnant, and making that a pretence to enhance their value. A father selling his offspring is no disgrace there. So I presume by him saying it enhances their value, what he means is like, if you sell a woman who's pregnant, then you're saying, oh, hey, you get 2 enslaved people for the price of 1, because you only have to pay 1, I guess. That's, yeah, but you're paying more. That's absolutely horrific. I should say what we're drinking tonight. This is Monster Reserve White Pineapple, which I'm not normally a fan of when the Monsters like announce what flavour they are. I prefer when they keep it a secret and you have to guess. But it is a reserve, so it's a special edition, so I suppose we shall let it off. And it's got heavy notes of pineapple with kind of extra deep notes of pineapple on the back. Very sweet, a little chemically, not an S tier or an A tier, I would say. This is probably a B tier Monster. Okay, that was a really awkward place to pause, wasn't it? So that it's a little less awkward, let's have a look at how the chat's going in the meantime. Hello to everybody. It's very nice to see you all here. So for those who are just joining us, we are reading The Horrors of Slavery, which is a pamphlet written in the 1820s by Robert Wedderburn, who was the son of a Jamaican slave owner and one of his enslaved women. He ended up becoming, oh, hang on, what's going on in here? I think that one's fine. Oh, yeah, YouTube's just asking me if some of your chat is okay. I think that one's fine. Oh, yeah, I don't know why YouTube's hidden that. It was a good idea at the time. It says booing means kissing ass. So, like, yeah, sucking up to somebody. Okay, that makes sense. I didn't know that one. Thank you. It says another moderator has already handled this? Who else? Who else is moderating my chat? Who are you? Show yourselves. Yeah, Dun-C, you're absolutely right. I guess another reason why a pregnant woman might sell for more is because it's evidence of good health. You're right, actually. That's the kind of horrific logic that this thing worked on. Kath Barnard, fun fact, Monster was first developed in South Africa. I didn't know that. Thank you very much to South Africa for such a fantastic product. Yes, I'm just realising that I am going to have a bit more on my hands in terms of the moderating this one than normal, aren't I? Ba -ba -ba. Charlie Wolfe, so he was an abolitionist. Yeah, you're damn right, he was an abolitionist, absolutely. So that wasn't his first cause. He was actually an anti-monarchist more than anything else. But in the 1820s, William Wilberforce visits him and he's like, "So you want to join the Avengers?" And and gets him into it. And I think gives the Abolitionist Society gives him some money to start publishing this stuff against slavery as well. Oh, YouTube has robotic moderators. Okay, well, okay. Thank you for letting me know that. That's good to know, and that's why they didn't quite get the moderation quite right on that one. That's lovely. Cool. So hopefully that's enough buffer going through the stream to get us back to reading this book. So it's a difficult read, and I'm afraid it's not going to get a huge amount better. Yeah, we're just going to have to deal with a lot of whiplash in terms of tone tonight, I think. But I'm glad you guys are with me reading this one, because this isn't one I know already. So this is it's good to have someone to talk to, give my thoughts out loud, and so it's not quite as heavy when you're reading it on your own. So he's talking about how his dad had sex with his enslaved women. A planter letting out his pretty female slaves for purposes of lust is by no means uncommon. My father ranged through the whole of his household for his own lewd purposes, for they being his personal property, cost nothing extra, and if any one proved with child, why, it was an acquisition, which one day might fetch something in the market, like a horse or a pig in Smithfield. In short, amongst his own slaves, my father was a perfect parish bull, and his pleasure was the greater because he at the same time increased his profits. I now come to speak of the infamous manner with which James Wedderburn, Esquire of Inveresk, and father to A. Colville, Esquire, number 35 Leadenhall Street. Man, he really has to give out their entire addresses each time. It's okay, we know who you're talking about now. You could have just said it the first time. Entrapped my poor mother in his power. My mother was a lady's maid and had received an education which perfectly qualified her to conduct a household in the most agreeable manner. She was the property of Lady Douglas, whom I have before mentioned, and prior to the time she met my father was chaste and virtuous. After my father had got his estate, he did not renounce the pestle and mortar, but in the capacity of doctor he visited Lady Douglas. He there met my mother for the first time, and was determined to have possession of her. His character was known, and therefore he was obliged to go covertly and falsely to work. In Jamaica, slaves that are esteemed by their owners have generally the power of refusal, whether they will be sold to a particular planter or not. And my father was aware that if he offered to purchase her, he would meet with a refusal. But his brutal lust was not to be stopped by trifles. My father's conscience would stretch to any extent, and he was a firm believer in the doctrine of grace abounding to the chief of sinners. For this purpose, he employed a fellow of the name of Cruikshank, a brother doctor and Scotchman, to strike a bargain with Lady Douglas for my mother. And this scoundrel of a Scotchman bought my mother for the use of my father in the name of another planter, a most respectable and highly esteemed man. I have often heard my mother express her indignation at this base and treacherous conduct of my father, a treachery the more base as it was so calm and premeditated. Let my brother Colville deny this if he can. Let him bring me into court, and I will prove what I here advance. To this present hour, while I think of the treatment of my mother, my blood boils in my veins, and had I not some connections for which I was bound to live, I should long ago have taken ample revenge of my father. But it is as well as it is, and I will not leave the world without some testimony to the injustice and inhumanity of my father. Here he's he's saying his mother was like, she was a house slave, so she was like well known to the family of the Douglases and like well liked by them. And so if James Wedderburn had said, "Hey, I want to buy you," like his mother would have said, I don't want to work for you, and the Douglases would have respected that. So what he's done is like done a little sneaky deal where he gets someone else to buy her instead, so she doesn't know who she's going to. And I particularly like, let my brother deny this if he can. I'll see you in court. I'm guessing that by this point, James Wedderburn was dead. I mean, this guy's like in his 60s, right? So James Wedderburn has got to be like 20, 30 years older than that. So I'm guessing he's dead by this point, and so it's his white son that he's worried about taking to court. From the time my mother became the property of my father, she assumed the direction and management of his house, for which no woman was better qualified. But her station there was very disgusting. My father's house was full of female slaves, all objects of his lusts, amongst whom he strutted like Solomon in his grand seraglio, or like a bantam cock upon his own dunghill. My good father's slaves did increase and multiply like Jacob's kin, and he cultivated those talents which God had granted so amply. My poor mother, from being the housekeeper, was the object of their envy, which was increased by her superiority of education over the common herd of female slaves. While in this situation, she bore my father 2 children, one of whom, my brother James, a millwright, I believe is now living in Jamaica upon the estate. Soon after this, I believe, my father introduced a new concubine into his seraglio, one Esther Trotter, a free tawny, whom he placed over my mother, and to whom he gave the direction of his affairs. My brother Colville asserts that my mother was of a violent and rebellious temper. I will leave the reader now to judge for himself whether she had not some reason for her conduct. Hath not a slave feelings? If you starve them, will they not die? If you wrong them, will they not revenge? Insulted on one hand and degraded on the other, was it likely that my poor mother could practice the Christian virtue of humility when her Christian master provoked her to wrath? She shortly afterwards became again pregnant, and I have not the least doubt but that from her violent and rebellious temper during that period, I have inherited the same disposition, the same desire to see justice overtake the oppressors of my countrymen, and the same determination to loose no stone unturned to accomplish so desirable an object. My mother's state was so unpleasant that my father at last consented to sell her back to Lady Douglas, but not till the animosity in my father's house had grown to such an extent that my uncle, Sir John Wedderburn, my father's elder brother, had given my mother an asylum in his house against the brutal treatment of my father. At the time of the sale, my mother was 5 months gone in the pregnancy, and one of the stipulations of the bargain was that the child which she then bore should be free from the moment of its birth. I was that child. When about 4 months old, the ill treatment of my mother had experienced such an effect upon her that I was obliged to be weaned to save her life.
Lady Douglas, at my admission into the Christian church, stood my godmother, and as long as she lived, never deserted me. She died when I was about 4 years old. Okay, so his mother gets pregnant again, a third time by this guy, and the situation is so bad in the house that he sells her back to Lady Douglas. But before that, like, she has to leave before that sale has even gone through. So Robert Wedderburn's uncle like gives her a place to stay because she just like cannot stay safely in the house anymore. And as part of the bargain, when she's sold back, the child that she's bearing is free. So that kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, where he was saying that a pregnant slave would be worth more. I guess if you just want to get one off your hands, then you say, well, you're not buying the child, so just take her at normal price, I guess.
Absolutely horrific logic. Let's have a look down at the stream. Let's have a look at the chat. While I'm looking at questions from the past, please do feel free to put questions about London history in the comments. It doesn't necessarily have to be about this text, but anything you're interested in, and I'll see how many I can get to. Okie dokie. The Abolitionist of Amber Adams, The Abolitionist Avengers is absolutely a movie I'd watch. And I guess the problem is that a lot of them didn't live at the same time, so it would have to be a little bit of a tweaking. Like if you wanted Alauda Equiano and this guy Robert Wedderburn in the same movie, you would have to do a bit of timeline tweaking, because there are kind of two waves of abolition in this country. There's like the one leading up to the 1807 Act that abolishes the slave trade. And then there's a second wave leading up to the 1833 Act where slavery is abolished altogether. And in between the two, there's kind of a lull where a lot of the first wave die off or get sick, which is what's happening to Wilberforce actually around this time. He is incredibly sick. So yeah, you'd have to do a little bit of a tweaking of the timeline, but yeah, I'd love to see an Abolitionist Avengers. There would be like Alauda Equiano and Ignatius Sancho and Mary Prince and Ottobah Cugoano and Phyllis Wheatley and this guy. And we'd have to have Thomas Clarkson in there too, because he's great. Oh, and Elizabeth Hayrick. She would be great. Oh man, it scrolled back again. Danny Lance, Red Bull or Monster? What's the go-to? Monster is my drink of choice. I'm not against Red Bull. I just don't like it as much, and the flavours aren't as fun. AJ, this is pretty heavy. You are correct. I'm so sorry about that. But you clicked on a video called The Horrors of Slavery, so I hope you at least a little bit knew what you were getting into. Azora, hi. What's the name of the book being read today? We are reading The Horrors of Slavery, which is an 1820s tract by Robert Wedderburn, who his own experience with slavery was that he was a child born to a slave owner and a slave woman. Ben MJ, your stream keeps stopping. I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope that that's not a problem on my end. I don't seem to be having any trouble on my end, so I hope that's yeah, I hope that's nothing on my end. Apologies if you're having trouble tonight. Ping pong, historical doxing, brilliant. Yes, right? Like it absolutely is historical doxing. Like there's a reason he keeps repeating the addresses of his father and his half brother. Absolutely, like go and annoy these guys. Like go and I don't think you could like sign them up to junky newsletters or anything back then, but like go around their houses and make your voice heard. Yeah, you see, this one, the AI is not even letting me see these ones. So I'm afraid if some of your messages have been retracted, I'm afraid that's not up to me, I'm afraid, sorry. Yeah, some of them, the YouTube won't even let me see them. Oh, yeah, I absolutely should have posted a link, shouldn't I? Did I not do that in the description? Apologies if not. I will definitely do that next time. I will post a link so that people can read along. But if you want to look it up on archive.org, type in Robert Wedderburn and his pamphlets will come up so that you can join along. Boaz Miller, anyone else notice the reference to the Merchant of Venice? Yes, shall we not revenge? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you wrong them, shall we not revenge? Absolutely. So he's saying, you know, I'm a little bit educated too, so you should listen to what I have to say. Seth Harris is suggesting some American names for the abolitionist Avengers. We've got Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Cassius Clay. Aubrey Harris, talking about abolition in terms of the death penalty and Charles Dickens. Yeah, that would be an interesting topic, actually. I would definitely do a video on that in the future. So yeah, on how we sort of, I mean, Charles Dickens was particularly against abolishing public executions. I don't know if he talked about abolishing executions generally, but when he writes about them, he's more worried about the effect it has on the viewers. He says, you know, it does like spiritual harm to you, like moral harm, to go and see someone hanged and not even care about it. So he's definitely against public executions. Thank you very much to Albert Voigt. Once again, you've been extremely generous. That's very sweet of you. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good evening. Angela Craw has been reading C.L.R. James's work about Black Jacobins. That's really cool. I would love to read some C.L.R. James one day. They are on my list. Offris Apifera, how was this writing published? Did he publish this himself? So I suspect he would have been funded by the Abolition Society. When he dedicates it to Wilberforce in the beginning, I suspect that's because it's Wilberforce's Abolition Society that's like stumping up the money for this to be published. The Abolition Society did have their own press. They had their own printing press, so they'd be able to put stuff out like this. Although I don't know for certain that it was them, but that's what I suspect happened. Anyone asking what the book is, it should be in the title and hopefully in the description as well. So you should be able to find it, you should be able to find a copy online and join along with us. Hello to Maxwell Tolan, who's watching on their honeymoon. Congratulations. Jitesh Vora 86, favourite movie set in London? Paddington 2, obviously. Yeah, it's got to be. I just saw it again this week. It's so good. When it gets to the end, I cry every single time. I love the shot where they're all escaping and there's like 4 of them. It's very Wes Anderson-y. There's like 4 of them in different cells and they all have to try, all the actors have to try and escape in the exact same way at the exact same time. And you can see them like thinking about it, like 1, 2, without trying to like look at the camera. They've got to time it perfectly. Thank you very much to Joseph King for sending $10. That's very kind of you. Melvin McCoy Jr. Sorry if I missed it, but were there any whites that were enslaved at this time? So not in the transatlantic trade. However, there were 1 or 2 people who, so like in terms of Robert Wedderburn, he's the son of a white man and a black woman, and he was lucky in that he got freed.
but that usually didn't happen. And if that happens for a couple of generations, you will eventually get children that are white passing. So, what's her name? There was a lady, hang on, that I want to do a video about one day. What's her name? Come on, Google, don't let me down. Ellen Craft. There we go. So Ellen Craft was an enslaved woman who escaped by dressing up as a white man and getting out that way. So she was obviously like pale skinned enough to pass as white, even though society didn't consider her white. Does that make sense?
Scrolled me down to the bottom again. We've got 2 more suggestions for the abolitionist Avengers, John Brown and William Lloyd Garrison. I think they're also both American figures, aren't they? I don't know them as well. I mean, I've heard of John Brown. I don't know William Lloyd Garrison. Callum Forster used some of my recent Shakespeare video in his last English exam. Well, congratulations. I hope you get a good mark. Fingers crossed. Jim Ross, thank you very much for 25 Canadian dollars. That's very kind of you, very sweet. Thank you so much. Amy Bojko, how rare was it for a child born out of slavery to become a published author in Victorian England? It was really rare. There are some, and I mean, not necessarily, this is pre-Victorian, this is Georgian England. So yeah, slavery is abolished before the Victorian period in this country. It's 1833, so it's 4 years before Victoria takes the throne. But to take your question in the spirit it's intended, there are 1 or 2. So you can look up Mary Prince, you can look up Olaudah Equiano, you can look up Ottobah Cugoano and Robert Wedderburn, who are all enslaved people who publish in this country, but they are a few out of thousands. It would have been rare. A lot of working class people, including enslaved people, wouldn't be able to read and write even, so they are lucky to have even learned that, let alone to get as far as publishing a book. Joan Young, after 40 years of living in England, there are a lot of parallels between African social history and the English class system. It's very possible. I don't know too much about African history, so that would be interesting to hear about. I encourage you to write something or make a video or something about that. But definitely we are as bogged down in class as Americans are in race. Class is an absolutely huge thing here. Seth Harris, do you still have military or wartime death penalties later on, including in the World Wars? Yeah, definitely in the First World War. I presume in the Second World War as well, you can still get court-martialed. But yeah, I've just been reading a lot about the First World War lately, and in that war we executed 300 of our own soldiers in court-martials, so shot by firing squad during that war. London question. Liverpool was, this is from Kath Barnard, or Bernard. If memory serves, Liverpool was the major port for the transatlantic slave trade. Did London serve as a port on the triangle, or was it more involved at a distance? So you are absolutely correct that Liverpool becomes Britain's main slaving port, but that's later in the trade. London does also have its period where it is the main slaving port. This is it tends to be like earlier in the trade, like early in the 18th century, more slaving ships are coming to London than they are to Liverpool. And then London loses its primacy first to Bristol, I think, and then to Liverpool.
But yeah, throughout London's involvement in the trade, we have a lot of slaving companies are based here. So the Royal African Company is based here, the South Sea Company is based here, most of their investors are based here. And then we also have the West India Docks, which is bringing in all the goods that the enslaved people were making from the West Indies to England. So all the sugar and stuff was coming into the West India Docks in London. So yes, absolutely, it has a lot of involvement, especially earlier on in the trade. Yeah. Aubrey Harris, on Sunday is the anniversary of Amnesty International. Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. That's very nice. Bardley Richard, thank you very much. $5 US. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Chris Parsons, are these going to be on catch up? They are only on catch up for my patrons, I'm afraid. Patreon.com/jdraperlondon if you want to get the catch ups. Matt W, does Clarkson have a cameo in Paddington? You mean Jeremy Clarkson? I don't think so. No. Is he supposed to? Why would you think that? Jeremy Clarkson doesn't have cameos in things. I think he was in Cars, wasn't he? Like he had a cameo in Cars, but that's not normal. Dan C, yes, of course. The insurance market as well is all based in, a lot of that was based in London. You have Lloyd's of London, which was a huge insurance market for slave trips and slave traders. Yep. Seth Harris, I've never really understood the triangle thing. It seems like it was really more 4 or 5 distinct markets. Yeah, a triangle is just a very simplified way of explaining it. In fact, most ships were not traveling in a triangle. They'd be doing like one of the sides of the triangle back and forth. So yeah, it's just a very simplified way of explaining it. Oh yeah, Granville Sharp in the Abolitionist Avengers. Absolutely, good shout. Miguel the Alpaca, slavery is not a subject I want to be an expert in. It is so depressing. You are quite right. It is very depressing. I don't like doing too much of it at any one time. Maxwell Tolan, what is your tier list for monster flavours? I absolutely have a tier list. It's all written down. Oh, I've gone way out of focus. I absolutely have a tier list. It's all written down. I have it really, really down. I have little reviews of all of them and a comprehensive tier list. I might share it one day as like a Patreon extra, maybe. Yeah, because it's a lot. But I haven't. The thing is, there are a lot of flavours that are just not available. I haven't had, so it's not got every single flavour that Monster have ever done on it. It's just whatever we're able to buy in this country. And I think I have tried everything that's available in this country, but that does often change, so it would be out of date pretty quickly. But yeah, I might do that as a little bonus video one day. Thank you very much to Michael Walker for $20 US, and you're coming to London in September. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. YouTube has told me to celebrate your super chat, so hurrah! Congratulations. I don't know why it specifically told me to celebrate yours. Not that yours isn't worth celebrating, it's just a bit of an odd choice. Rune Revival. Is there any country which has never had slaves? Huh. I guess there are lots of countries that have only been founded in the 20th century, so they've never had slaves legally. Especially a lot of African countries, actually, like places that got their independence in the 20th century. And so, like, for example, like Nigeria, which became independent in the 60s. I guess you could say that they've never had legal slavery in that sense. Yeah, I guess it depends on how you define it. I'm sure there are people who know lots more about world history than I do who would help you answer that question. Or maybe you could do your own homework and come back to us. Come back to us in the chat once you've figured it out. Alrighty. Matt W. Some say the Egyptian slaves were volunteers-ish. Yeah, I've been listening to the Empire podcast episode about this recently, actually. It's really interesting. A lot of it is a lot less conclusive than I thought it was. I thought we were quite certain that that it wasn't enslaved people who built the pyramids. And actually, it turns out the evidence is, you could sort of read it either way to a certain extent. All right, folks, get ready for another tonal piece of whiplash. We are going to read a little bit more of the book. So for those of you who are joining us, we are reading The Horrors of Slavery by Robert Wedderburn, which is an account of basically his dad, who was a plantation owner in Jamaica, and all the awful things that his dad did, and how that resulted in Robert Wedderburn's own life being pretty miserable. From my mother, I was delivered over to the care of my grandmother, who lived at Kingston and who earned her livelihood by retailing all sorts of goods, hard or soft, smuggled or not, for the merchants of Kingston. My grandmother was the property of one Joseph Payne at the east end of Kingston, and her place was to sell his property, cheese, checks, chintz, milk, gingerbread, etc., in doing which she trafficked on her own account with the goods of other merchants, having an agency of £half a crown in the pound allowed her for the trouble. So I think this means that she was owned by a merchant in Kingston, and she did a little of her own business on the side so she could earn a little bit of money herself. No woman was perhaps better known in Kingston than my grandmother, by the name of Talky Amy, signifying a chattering old woman. Though a slave, such was the confidence the merchants of Kingston had in her honesty that she could be trusted to any amount. In fact, she was the regular agent for selling smuggled goods. I never saw my dear father but once in the island of Jamaica, when I went with my grandmother to know if he meant to do anything for me, his son. Giving her some abusive language, my grandmother called him a mean Scotch rascal, thus to desert his own flesh and blood, and declared that as she had kept me hitherto, so she would yet, without his paltry assistance. This was the parental treatment I received from a Scotch West India planter and slave dealer. He keeps going on about how Scotch he is. It's a bit of an odd emphasis. So yeah, I guess his grandma, who was looking after him, goes to his dad and is like, are you going to help or not? And when he says no, she yells at him and says, well, I'll manage without you then. When I was about 11 years of age, my poor old grandmother was flogged for a witch by her master, the occasion of which I must relate in this place. Joseph Payne, her master, was an old and avaricious merchant who was concerned in the smuggling trade. He had a vessel manned by his own slaves, and commanded by a Welshman of the name Lloyd, which had made several profitable voyages to Honduras for mahogany, which was brought to Jamaica, and from thence forwarded to England. The old miser had some notion that Lloyd cheated him in the adventure, and therefore resolved to go himself as a check upon him. Through what means I know not, but most likely from information given by Lloyd out of revenge and jealousy, the Spaniards surprised and captured the vessel, and poor old Payne, at 70 years of age, was condemned to carry stones at Fort Homia in the Bay of Honduras for a year and a day, and his vessel and slaves were confiscated to the Spaniards. On the way home he died and was tossed overboard to make food for fishes. Jesus! Did he do anything wrong? I mean, other than, like, this isn't... Why did the Spaniards imprison him for a year and a day? Was that just because... Was that because he was smuggling? Was this a smuggling voyage? Yes, okay, yes it was, okay. So he's smuggling mahogany from Honduras to Jamaica. The Spanish catch him. put him in prison in his 70s, and when he's finally free, he dies on the return voyage and gets buried at sea. His nephew succeeded to his property, and a malicious woman slave, to curry favour with him, persuaded him that the ill success of Old Payne's adventures was owing to my grandmother's having bewitched the vessel. The old miser had liberated 5 of his slaves before he set out on his unlucky expedition, and my grandmother's new master, being a believer in the doctrine of witchcraft, conceived that my grandmother had bewitched the vessel out of revenge for her not being liberated also. To punish her, therefore, he tied up the old woman of 70 years and flogged her to that degree that she would have died but for the interference of a neighbour. Oh, hang on, I'm having a little bit of technical trouble. But she would have died but for the interference of a neighbour. Now, what aggravated the affair was that my grandmother had brought up this young villain from 8 years of age until now he had treated her as a mother. But my grandmother had full satisfaction soon afterwards. The words of our blessed Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ were fulfilled in this instance. Do good to them that despitefully use you, and in doing so you shall heap coals of fire upon their heads. This woman had an only child, which died soon after this affair took place, plainly a judgment of God, and the mother was forced to come and beg pardon of my grandmother for the injury she had done her, and solicit my grandmother to assist her in the burial of her child. My grandmother replied, I can forgive you, but I can never forget the flogging. And the good old woman instantly set about to assisting her in the child's funeral, it being as great an object to have a decent burial with the blacks in Jamaica as with the lower classes in Ireland. Okay, don't know why he had to bring the Irish into it, but apparently they like funerals just as much as Irish people, whatever that means. This same woman, who had so wickedly calumniated my grandmother, afterwards made public confession of her guilt in the marketplace at Kingston, on purpose to ease her guilty conscience and to make atonement for the injury she had done. I mention this to show upon what slight grounds the planters exercise their cowskin whips, not sparing even an old woman of 70 years of age. But to return. After the death of Lady Douglas, who was brought to England to be buried, James Charles Sholto Douglas Esquire, my mother's master, promised her her freedom on his return to Jamaica. But his covetous heart would not let him perform his promise. He told my mother to look out for another master to purchase her, and that her price was to be £100. The villain Cruikshank, whom I have mentioned before, offered Douglas £10 more for her, and Douglas was so mean as to require £110 from my mother. Otherwise, he would have sold her to Cruikshank against her will, for purposes the reader can guess. Jesus Christ! Oh my God, I'd not heard of that practice. That is horrific. So, this woman's owned by James Douglas, and he says, right, find yourself someone who'll buy you for £100. And she finds a guy, oh no, she doesn't even find a guy. There's a guy who offers £110. And her master's like, okay, so you've got to pay me that money. What? Oh, you've got to pay me that so I don't sell you to him because he's got the highest offer. And if you want to avoid going to him, you better pay me the £110 instead. Jesus! That's absolutely awful. That's a new horror for me. I've not heard of that one before. One Dr. Campbell purchased her, and in consequence of my mother having been a companion of and borne children to my father, Mrs. Campbell used to upbraid her for not being humble enough to her, who was but a doctor's wife. This ill treatment had such an effect on my mother that she resolved to starve herself to death, and though a cook, abstained from victuals for 6 days. When her intention was discovered, Dr. Campbell became quite alarmed for his £110 and gave my mother leave to look out for another owner, which she did, and became the property of a Dr. Boswell. Okay, so she's having such a miserable time with Dr. Campbell because his wife is being awful to her that she decides to starve herself. Oh, what an awful way to go. And so when Dr. Campbell finds out, he's like, fine, if you want to go to somewhere else, you can go, but they've also got to be able to buy you for £110. And then he includes a letter he's written previously about her treatment with specifically Dr. Boswell. So we'll read this letter, which is very different in tone from the rest of the book. There's a lot more exclamation marks in it. And then we'll have a little break and read some comments. So this is about his mother's treatment with Dr. Boswell. Sir, your observations on the meeting of receivers of stolen men call for my sincere thanks. I, being a descendant of a slave by a base slaveholder, the late James Wedderburn, Esquire, of Inveresk, who sold my mother when she was of child of me, her third son by him. She was forced to submit to him, being his slave, though he knew she disliked him. She knew that he was mean, and when gratified would not give her her freedom, which is the custom for those, as a reward, who have preserved their persons with gentlemen, if I may call a slave dealer a gentleman. I have seen my poor mother stretched on the ground, tied hands and feet, and flogged in the most indecent manner, though being pregnant at the same time. Her fault being the not acquainting her mistress that her master had given her leave to see her mother in town. So great was the anger of this Christian slave dealer that he went 15 miles to punish her while on the visit. Her master was then one Boswell. His chief companion was Captain Parr, who chained a female slave to a stake and starved her to death. Had it not been for a British officer in the army who dug her up and proved it, this fact would not have been known. Oh my God, what? The murderer was sentenced to transport himself for 1 year. He came to England and returned in the time. This was his punishment. Oh my God, so his punishment was just to leave Jamaica for a year. And so he just went to England for a year? Oh my God. I mean, still, that's like the only time I've ever heard a slave owner being punished for killing an enslaved person. I guess it's because he didn't actually own this woman. He says it was his chief companion who did it. So yeah, his punishment for starving a woman to death is to leave Jamaica for a year. He came to England and returned in the time. This was his punishment. My uncle and aunt were sent to America and sold by their father's brother, who said that he sent them to be educated. He had a little shame, for the law in Jamaica allowed him to sell them, or even they had been his children. So much for humanity and Christian goodness. As for these men who wished that the king would proclaim that there was no intention of emancipation, oh, what barbarism. Whew. Yeah, that's much more firebrandy than the rest of the book. It's got a lot more exclamation marks, a lot more capital letters, and is even more explicit than the book, which I didn't think he was going to do. That is absolutely awful, every single turn. How are we getting on in the chat? Are you guys doing okay? I hope you're all right. Let's have a look at it.
Scaramouche _ mummy issues.
Okay. Do you know anything about Anne Bonny? I mean, just the vaguest bit that she sort of ran away to sea and disguised herself as a man. But yeah, I should do a video on her if I can find a London connection. I always try and make sure there is one. Then I will do it. But yeah, I would have to make sure that she's in some way been to London at some point. Thinker hat needed. Is this a completely true story told by the man who was born to a slave woman and a plantation owner? He just tells everything he witnessed. Yes, pretty much. So in the introduction, which I skimmed before joining you guys, so there's an introduction written by a historian, and he says, obviously his account was debated at the time. So the son of the white son of this plantation owner gets in the press and says, oh, this is all lies, he would never have done that. But there are lots of other accounts that back up what Wedderburn is saying in this, that James Wedderburn was particularly awful in this way, and that he was known in Jamaica to be acting like this. So yeah, in general, the account is an accurate one. And when he sees, and the stuff about, the stuff he's seen himself with his own eyes, I think we can believe when he says, I have seen my poor mother stretched on the ground, tied hands and feet and flogged in the most indecent manner. Yeah, I think we can believe him since he's a first-hand witness for that one. Matt W, the story kind of moves fast and is extremely twisted. I guess so. I think he repeats himself a little bit, actually, which might be what's confusing you. It seems, it's pretty clear on the page, so it might just be the fact that I'm reading it and sort of turning away to do asides that's twisting it up for you. If anyone... 25 stars is asking what page I'm on in the book. So it depends on what edition you're reading, obviously, if you've got the same edition as me. But I am on page 51 at the moment. And this is, The Horrors of Slavery and Other Writings by Robert Wedderburn. Jesus Christ, it's 3 a.m. in Perth. Yes, please do go and get some sleep, Christopher Smith. Absolutely. Susan Sheehan, this is all on a whole new level of horrendous. Yeah. I've been if you watch my long video on the slave trade, there's a bit where I show sort of images from the time of things like this happening, and then there's a bit that says some images redacted. And yeah, it was stuff like this. And on one hand, you sort of want to show this stuff because there are so many people who don't believe it was that bad. But on the other hand, I do want school kids to be able to watch it, and I don't want to ruin people's day. I felt awful after seeing those pictures, and I didn't want to just chuck them in. Yeah, it was difficult. But hopefully with this one, people are sort of aware that this is what's going to be happening. It was a good idea at the time. Says, the past is the worst. There is no time I'd rather live than right now. Although, 50 years in the future maybe would be good as well. Ralph Klanowski, would you call the serfs of the Middle Ages slaves? No, serfs I know why you say it, because they weren't free, but at the same time they also used the word slave to mean, like, they had slaves in the Middle Ages as well. So if you start calling serfs slaves as well, it's going to get you confused. So it's not a useful piece of terminology to call serfs slaves, I'm afraid. I do know what you mean though. James Ivy, any history of London firefighters? Yeah, we could do a video on the Tooley Street fire and Captain Shaw, who was like a really famous firefighter, like while he was alive. He's so famous that there was like there's a GNS opera that like references him just as a passing joke, because they knew he was coming to the premiere, and so like the idea was that they'd do like a breaking the fourth wall joke about him, and put the spotlight on him, and he'd sort of wave at the audience. And he was killed in this gigantic street fire in Southwark in 1861. Absolutely massive. I mean, we talk about the Great Fire of London being very, very devastating, but the Tooley Street fire, the Great Fire burned for like 3 or 4 days. The Tooley Street fire burned for 2 weeks. It was massive. It's just that not as many people lived there. So yeah, that'd be a good idea. Militariacs. Do you know any famous World War II lads or lasses? I'm guessing that's supposed to say. From London? Yeah, of course. Loads. Absolutely. Trying to pick out one off the top of my head. Yeah, try and be a bit more specific, and I'll think of someone. It's a very general question, and it's one of those where there's so many that I can't grab onto any one in my mind. Oh, Tatrankaska. What's the name of the time traveler guidebook you were talking about? You've almost got it. If you type in time traveler guidebook to medieval London, I'm sure you'll find it. It's called The Time Traveller's Guide to Medieval London, and it's by Ian Mortimer. It's one of my favourite pieces of pop history, like top 3, absolutely. So yes, very much recommended. Neutron Jack, have you been to the Museum on the Atlantic Slave Trade in Liverpool? I haven't, actually. I've never been to Liverpool, come to think of it. I've only just realised that. I have never been to Liverpool. But yeah, if I go to Liverpool, then that would absolutely be on my list of things to see. I hear it is very well done. Saad Hussein, can you do a video on the specifics of the royal coronation regalia and why the ceremony happens the way it does? Oh, are you not tired of the coronation? Yeah, I guess I could do. Maybe I'll maybe leave it a bit until I'm a bit less burned out on the coronation. I might do it in a few months. I talk about the coronation regalia a lot when I do tours at the Tower of London, because that's where it's all kept. So yes, I absolutely have information on that. But I think a video on it would seem like I'd put it out too late if I did it right now. So I might leave it a few months. Mozart fan, is this before or after the American Revolution? This is after. So this is the 1820s. The American Revolution is in the 1760s, 1770s, 1780s. Cathalisi, the horrors of World War II are taught pretty relentlessly to school kids in Germany and Austria. I think slavery should be taught in a similar way. I mean, I did get the slave trade at school. I think what is lacking in British schools is stuff on the empire. I had no idea. I mean, I still have no idea about what was going on in the empire. And I understand, like, you can't do all of it. You can't even nearly do all of it. It's a third of the world for, I don't know, yeah, over hundreds of years. But I do think, yeah, I just didn't know anything. It wasn't even that I got taught it was good. I just didn't get taught about it. And then sort of when I grew up, I sort of realised that a lot of other countries resent us. Is that the right word? That we were seen very differently to how I had pictured us as a country. And I wish that I would have got that earlier. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I resolved to learn more about British India. And before I did, I wrote down a list of everything I knew about British India, and it was like 8 things. And most of those I wasn't even sure about. I was like, there was an East India Company, and then there was a Raj, and then there was Gandhi, and there were maybe trains. It was absolutely pitiful. And yeah, I would have liked, I think that we need a little bit more on the empire in our history class. But yeah, I at the same time, you can't do everything. There's always more stuff you should be doing in school, and it's not possible to do all of it. At some point, people do have to educate themselves because there's just no time to do everything. Sayan Bhattacharya, what about the British Museum and countries claiming their stuff back? What's your take on it? I'm not going to go through it all here, but if you watch my video on the Benin bronzes or the Benin plaques, then I think I still pretty much agree with everything I said in that video. So that's, yeah, mostly my take on it. I actually really like the British stuff in the British Museum. My favourite stuff in there is the British stuff. There's the Sutton Hoo ship and the giant ring brooches and that sort of thing. So that's the bit of it that I like the best. But then again, I'm a Viking nerd, so of course I'd like that stuff best. Matthew Basler, are there any funny or interesting LGBTQ plus stories or histories beyond the infamous ones like Oscar Wilde, I think you mean? Yeah, there's loads. I have, let's see, what have I been reading about lately? I've been reading about 3 suffragettes lately, Edith Craig, Christopher St. John and Claire Atwood, or Tony Atwood, who lived in like a menage a trois, like a 3-woman menage a trois in Covent Garden in the 1900s. And yeah, they were all, I think they were all suffragettes. Certainly Edie and Christopher were. And then they lived together from 1616 for the rest of their lives. And they were supposed to all be buried together. Christopher and Tony are. But Edie died quite a while before them. She died like 15 years before them. And she was supposed to be buried with them, but they lost her ashes. Like, oh, how awful. Like, what? How do you lose someone's ashes? Did they... Like, there's no good way of losing someone's ashes. It's absolutely cringe. How awful. So they have a little memorial to her, like next to the 2 burials, because they don't know where she is. But yeah, it's a little bit of hidden LGBT history.
Kevin Sweet, thank you very much for the $5. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. And you're going to visit some of the locations on my channel. I hope you enjoy them. I have a whole playlist called Things to Do in London. I hope you enjoy it. Solar Prime 94. Is it true that Britain ended the transatlantic slave trade? No, Britain can't end it all by itself. There were lots of different countries participating in it. Britain did get on it earlier than some European countries, but in truth, it mostly just did it earlier than the States. But that's not hard. Most people did it earlier than the States. I think I would count Haiti as the first country to properly abolish the slave trade, slavery, actually, in total. And they got there before us. Matthew Fours, as an American, it's quite odd to see the coronation stuff. Kings and queens are something from the past, almost mythological. That's fair enough, and yeah, totally valid. I mean, that's kind of why we do it, because it seems cool and mythological and ancient and old-timey and gives you a sense of tradition and connection with the past. So I totally get why people are interested in it, absolutely. But as for myself, I think I'm done making videos about the coronation for a little while. I did do, I think, 3 in a row around the time, just the week leading up to the coronation, on the shorts. So you can go back and have a look at those if you want some more coronation info. And I'm happy to do questions about the royals more generally, but the coronation specifically, I'm a little bit burned out. Gecko1710, any history of the Natural History Museum or London Zoo? Yeah! Oh my gosh, I've been reading about William Buckland lately, and he was a geologist. This is like before, he was like there at the beginning of paleontology as a study. I've just gone pink and green, that was weird. Yeah, he's like a geologist studying the very first fossils that are being scientifically studied. And he's also on a personal mission to eat everything in the animal kingdom. Like he's like trying to eat as many animals as he can because he wants to find new animals to domesticate, basically. Like he thinks, you know, the population is increasing, there's not going to be enough food for everyone, we need to find more than just cow, pig and chicken that we can farm and that taste good and that can make a good meal. And so he makes it his personal mission to eat his way through the entire animal kingdom. And he is also one of the first founding members of London Zoo. And if you look at the very first constitution for London Zoo, it's like, we're making this zoo in order to discover more uses of animals. And you're like, yeah, uses for eating them. So, yeah, there was a bit of that going on. And I'm not saying that anyone like ate the animals at London Zoo, but William Buckland definitely ate lots of weird animals, and he definitely helped to found London Zoo. There's a connection there, which I'm trying to pin down, doing a bit of research at the moment. For those in the chat who I'm certain are asking, he said his least favourite animals were mole and bluebottle. Hey Jay, have you thought about doing a video on the London Stone? I absolutely have. Yeah, I did a TikTok on it a couple of years ago. I don't know if it's made its way onto being published on YouTube yet as a short. You would have to check. I'm still months away from getting all my old TikToks up on here. But yeah, I have definitely done it in the past. Absolutely. Headsinger, do you ever do collaborations with other history tubers? I haven't. Well, so she's not on YouTube, but I did the John or Eleanor Reichner video with Mireille Pardon, who's on TikTok. She's a history TikToker. And I did that with her, and that was a lot of fun, even though my tech setup did not work at all. So I had to kind of bodge the interview in the edit. But yeah, I would absolutely be up for doing that if anyone reached out to me and had something interesting in terms of their idea. Cyber Grandad, most important question, which is your favourite flavour of Monster? So I prefer variety to any one particular flavour of Monster. I would rather have a different flavour every day of the week than have the flavour I consider the best every day of the week. But S tier has got to be Mango Loco, Paradise Punch, Pipeline Punch, what else? Definitely those three are really, really good ones. We are arguing about Churchill in the comments. I did not expect that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Churchill then. We've got sort of 10 minutes or so, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, Churchill is a complicated figure. First off, because he just changed his mind a lot over the course of his life. So if you if you find a quote from him that says one thing, that doesn't necessarily mean he believed the same thing 20 years later. And second, he's not all bad and all good. He had a lot of kind of complicated views that don't cleanly map onto modern politics. Not that he was unusual in that respect. Like, everyone has complicated views that don't map onto modern day politics. So on one hand, if it had been another person as PM, like another member of the government, if it had been Halifax or Lord North or Chamberlain, they might have surrendered in World War II, and we might have been, even if they hadn't, we still might have been invaded by Germany at some point, and we never were. And so I have to be thankful to Churchill for that. He was very keen to get the Americans on side, which in my opinion stopped us getting invaded. On the other hand, he was really racist, like just explicitly racist. God, there was a quote I read from him the other day, and it was like, I do not accept that just because a people have always lived there, that gives them the right to the land. I don't accept it with the Red Indians. I don't accept it with the Palestinians. And I don't accept it with the Australians. Which, is nuts. It was like, why should they get the right to the land if a stronger race comes and takes the land? Which is just a horrific might makes right kind of thinking. Before you get to the racist stuff, he detested Mahatma Gandhi. He said Gandhiism in all its forms must sooner or later be grappled with and crushed. He thought that the idea of even an India that had its own government, that could vote for its own government, was so horrific, that it was so beyond the pale, that it actually turned off members of his own party. They thought he was a bit of a nutter because he was so he abhorred the idea of Indian independence so much, it made him angry.
What was the other thing I was going to say? Indian independence. Oh yeah, and then like, it's not even just the racist stuff. He like hated the idea of an NHS, which I don't think anyone in this country would argue against now. But when when Labour was campaigning against him and proposing the NHS and the sort of beginning of the welfare state, he called them the Gestapo. He said this will create a new Gestapo in Britain. Like what? He didn't want us to have an NHS, and so I can't, I can't wholeheartedly think he was a great man. Gosh, while I've been blathering on, you've probably done all this in the comments already because you're very smart people. Oh, some people agreeing with me on my monster takes. Hello to Chill Zed, Pacific Punch, and Mango Loco. Absolutely. Elko de Boer, would you consider doing a video about J.R.R. Tolkien's stay in London? I didn't know. He had, I'm sure he did come to London. I just don't know about it. I do know a little bit about Tolkien because I do day trips to Oxford. So I know a little bit about him from that point of view. And I have done little joke videos about him and C.S. Lewis in the past. But I would absolutely consider doing a video on Tolkien's time in London. I didn't know too much about it, but that's cool. James Ivy, I'm sure I've mentioned the fire stuff already. Oh, specifically the London Fire Brigade. I don't know. I'm really sorry. I don't know anything off the top of my head about it. Oh yeah, room 120 times. What about Vincent van Gogh living in Stockwell? Oh my God, yes, I should do a video on that. You're quite right. I should do like a video on people you wouldn't have expected to live in London, like Karl Marx, Jimi Hendrix, I don't know who else, Haile Selassie, people that lived in London that you wouldn't expect. I should do a whole video on that. Monster Chaos is on your top. That is just a terrible cold take. Absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to strenuously disagree with you. Chaos is like a D tier one for me. I'd rather have almost any flavour. Although it's not the worst. And the worst one is, the worst one I've ever tried is like a Monster sports drink that they tried coming out with, and it was called Striker, I think. And it was in like a bottle, like a Lucozade bottle. And it just tasted like foot. It was awful. Neutron Jack, did you know that there is a museum dedicated to Winston Churchill in Fulton, Missouri? Yes, I did, because the ruins of the church that is there are still in London. Like, you can still go to the ruins. We've not built anything else on it. Sion Bhattacharya and the Bengal famine. Yeah, absolutely, of course. AS. So if I understand Churchill's logic right, if the Germans had conquered Britain, then the British would have no right to the land. Yeah, you can't fault that logic. Absolutely. Bob Marley in London. Thank you, Callum Forster. That's another one that's surprising, right? He does have a blue plaque on the place he stayed. Yeah, absolutely. It's in Chelsea. I mean, I don't really know anything about Bob Marley, but I would definitely consider doing a video on him. I would have to do a little research first. Michael Williams, Mozart lived on Charing Cross Road. You're very close. He lived on Cecil Court, and then also in Mayfair. Room 120 times. Ho Chi Minh lived in London. Yes, he's another surprising one. Absolutely. Boaz James Miller, Giuseppe Garibaldi. Yep, that's another good one. Alrighty, I'm going to do like a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap it up for the night. Amre Khan Arduch, how do you know the taste of foot? Sus. Fair, you got me. I don't actually know the taste of foot. It's what I imagine foot would taste like. Michael Walker, wasn't there a whole mess of World War II leaders in London at the same time? Yeah, loads and loads of European governments fled to London and did their governments from exile here. And then the Americans were also over here as well, because it was just easier to sort things out in London, because you're closer to where all the fighting's going on. Absolutely. Mike Dixon, do you do any guided tours in Chiswick? I'm afraid I don't. That'd be quite far out for me. I don't know how much... what's the word? How much interest I would get for a tour in Chiswick, but I'm sure there is loads of cool stories there. Finn Romanoff, do the animals at the Tower of London? Yeah, that's a really good shout. Yeah, you're totally right. I should do a video on the animals of the Tower of London. I should have written all these down, shouldn't I? Absolutely. Feel Better Social Network. Would you do a video on London members clubs? Yeah, of course. I think I have done one in the past, although again, I don't know if it's made its way to YouTube yet. I've done one on Brooks. It was Brooks, I think. Yeah, I have. And I would definitely consider the other ones as well. I think in the past I have been invited to some, although I think all the invitations sort of fell through. But if anyone wants to invite me to their St James's Club and let me do some filming, then I will absolutely take you up on that. Alrighty, we'll do Cauldron Moon. Did Edgar Allan Poe spend any time in London? I don't know. He was like mates with Charles Dickens. I know they definitely wrote to each other, but I don't know if he ever came here. Room 120 times, do a history of universities in London. I have done that. I've done a video on KCL was founded in a duel. Absolutely enjoy it. Matt W, a London statue a day. I mean, yeah, it would be hard, but yes, I could do a different London statue every day. There'd be a lot of really boring ones, though. Samson David Bowie lived in London, absolutely. He also recorded some of his albums in Soho. And hang on, it was a good idea at the time, has been asking me this a lot. What's your favourite London history story? My favourite one is... can't choose. My favourite one is, at the moment, my favourite one is Thomas Blood, who stole the crown jewels and got away with it. And we don't know how. He went, after he stole the crown jewels and was caught, he spoke to the king, and to this day we don't know what he said to him. And when he came out of that room, he was a free man. Did he have dirt on the king? Did the king put him up to it in the first place? Did he offer to spy for him? We don't know, but I would love to find out. It's one of London's great mysteries. Thank you very much to Alex Gilmore for the £5. Thank you to everyone who donated. This chat will be available for patrons on Catch Up. So if you'd like to catch up on any of the previous, do head over to patreon.com/jdraperlondon. and sign up for as little as £3 a month. And I will put the link to the next one of these up very shortly. Keep your eye out. I hope you have a great evening, and I will see you again soon.